I never believed in monsters. Not really. Sure, I'd heard the stories growing up in northern Michigan. Tales whispered around campfires about things that lurked in the dense forests, creatures that walked on two legs but weren't quite human. My grandfather used to tell me about the Dogman, a wolf-like beast that stood 7 feet tall and hunted in the deep woods. I'd laugh it off, chalk it up to local folklore meant to keep kids from wandering too far from home. But I believed in the Wendigo even less. That one always seemed too fantastical, too rooted in Native American mythology to be real. A cannibalistic spirit that could possess people, make them hunger for human flesh, imitate voices to lure victims. It all sounded like something from a horror movie. The kind of thing that couldn't possibly exist in our modern world of smartphones and GPS. I was wrong about both of them. My name is Marcus Webb, and I'm 32 years old. I work as a wildlife photographer, which means I spend a lot of time alone in the wilderness, chasing the perfect shot of eagles, wolves, and whatever other creatures cross my path. It's solitary work, but I've always preferred it that way. Less drama, fewer complications. Just me, my camera, and nature in its rawest form. 3 months ago, I took an assignment that would change everything I thought I knew about the world. A nature magazine wanted shots of the Upper Peninsula during late fall, that transitional period when autumn bleeds into winter, when the forests take on an almost otherworldly quality. The colors would be muted, they said, but there was something haunting and beautiful about the landscape during that time. They wanted to capture that essence. I set up my base camp near a place locals called the Blackwood Forest, about 40 miles northwest of Marquette. The area had a reputation, though I didn't know that at first. It was only after I'd already pitched my tent and settled in that I drove into the nearest town, a tiny place called Ravens Creek for supplies. The general store was one of those old-fashioned places that seemed frozen in time, with creaking floorboards and shelves stocked with everything from canned goods to fishing tackle. The woman behind the counter was in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that seemed to see right through you. "You're that photographer," she said as I set my items on the counter. It wasn't a question. "Word travels fast," I replied, trying to sound friendly. "Small town." She rang up my purchases slowly, deliberately, as if she was working up to saying something. "You're camping out by Blackwood?" "That's right." "Beautiful area." Her hands paused over the register. "Beautiful, yes, but not safe. Not this time of year." I gave her what I thought was a reassuring smile. "I've been camping in remote areas for over a decade. I know how to handle myself around wildlife. It's not the wildlife you need to worry about." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "People go missing out there, especially when the weather turns. They hear things, voices of people they know, calling out to them. They follow those voices into the woods, and they don't come back." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I pushed it aside. Every remote area had its stories, its local legends meant to add mystery to the place. I appreciate the concern, but I'll be fine. "I'm not planning on wandering off in the dark." She shook her head, bagging my items with sharp, frustrated movements. "You city folk never listen. Just remember, if you hear someone calling your name out there, someone you know can't possibly be there, don't answer, don't follow. And whatever you do, don't go out after dark." I thanked her, paid, and left, dismissing her warnings as superstition. But as I drove back to my campsite, her words echoed in my mind. There had been something in her eyes, something that went beyond typical small-town paranoia. It was genuine fear. That first week was perfect. The weather held cold but clear, with temperatures hovering just above freezing during the day. The forest was everything the magazine had hoped for. Bare birch trees stood like white sentinels against the darker evergreens. The ground was covered in a carpet of fallen leaves in shades of rust and gold, punctuated by patches of frost that glittered in the early morning light. I got some incredible shots. A red fox picking its way through the underbrush, a great horned owl perched on a dead tree at dawn, a small waterfall, half frozen in crystalline beauty. I fell into a comfortable routine. Wake before sunrise, coffee over the camp stove, and out into the forest with my camera until the lights started to fade. Back to camp for dinner, organize my photos, and into my sleeping bag by 9. Simple, peaceful. It was on the 8th day that things started to feel wrong. I was about 3 miles from my camp, following a game trail that wound through a particularly dense section of forest. The trees here grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to create a natural canopy that blocked out much of the sky. The temperature had dropped overnight, and the ground crunched beneath my boots with each step. I was focused on tracking a group of deer whose prints I'd spotted earlier when I heard it. Marcus, my name, spoken clearly, carried on the still air. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding. The voice had come from somewhere to my left, deeper in the forest. It sounded like my sister, Emily, but that was impossible. Emily lived in Chicago, over 500 miles away. She had 2 kids and a demanding job. There was no way she'd be out here. Marcus, help me. The voice came again, and this time I could hear distress in it. My rational mind screamed that this was wrong, that this couldn't be real, but every instinct I had as a brother made me want to investigate. What if something had happened? What if she'd tried to surprise me and gotten lost? I took a step toward the voice. Please, Marcus, I'm hurt. That stopped me. The old woman's warning came flooding back. If you hear someone calling your name out there, someone you know can't possibly be there, don't answer. Don't follow. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. No signal. I was too deep in the forest. But I pulled up Emily's contact and looked at our last message exchange from 2 days ago. She'd sent a photo of her kids at a soccer game. She was in Chicago. She was safe. Marcus, why won't you help me? The voice was closer now, and I realized with growing horror that whatever was making that sound was moving through the forest toward me. And it was moving fast too fast for a person to navigate through the dense undergrowth. I ran. I crashed through the forest, branches whipping at my face, my camera bag bouncing painfully against my hip. My breath came in ragged gasps, the cold air burning my lungs. Behind me, I could hear something moving through the trees, keeping pace with me effortlessly. Marcus, come back. Why are you running from me? Emily's voice, but wrong somehow. The words were right, but there was something off about the cadence, the tone. It was like listening to a recording that had been slightly corrupted, familiar, but fundamentally wrong. I didn't know if I was heading in the right direction. In my panic, I'd lost my bearings completely. The forest all looked the same endless trees, the same gray-brown carpet of leaves, the same weak sunlight filtering through the branches. I was hopelessly lost. The voice kept calling, sometimes Emily's, sometimes changing to my mother's, once even to my ex-girlfriend's. It seemed to know everyone I cared about, cycling through their voices with horrible accuracy. But underneath all of them was that same wrongness, that uncanny valley quality that made my skin crawl. I don't know how long I ran. My legs were burning. My lungs felt like they might explode, but fear kept me moving. Finally, I burst through a line of trees and stumbled into a small clearing. I bent over, hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath. The clearing was roughly circular, maybe 30 feet across, ringed by massive pine trees. In the center was a flat rock, horn smooth, with what looked like old carvings on its surface symbols I didn't recognize. The ground here was strangely bare, no leaves, no undergrowth, just hard-packed earth. I had just enough time to register how odd this was when I heard movement at the edge of the clearing. What emerged from the trees wasn't my sister. I don't have words to properly describe what I saw. It was tall, impossibly tall, at least 8 feet and skeletally thin. Its skin, if you could call it that, was a grayish-white, stretched tight over jutting bones. The limbs were too long, the joints bent at wrong angles. But the worst part was the face. It had tried to make itself look human. There were features their eyes, a mouth, something approximating a nose, but they were all slightly off, positioned incorrectly, proportioned wrong. It was like looking at a child's drawing of a person, translated into 3 horrifying dimensions. And as it smiled at me with too many teeth, it spoke in Emily's voice. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." I backed away, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. This was some kind of hallucination, brought on by exposure or bad food. It moved toward me with a horrible, jerking gait, its movements somehow both slow and impossibly fast. When it opened its mouth, the jaw unhinged like a snake's, revealing rows of needle-like teeth that went back and back into darkness. "Don't you want to help me, Marcus?" I was about to die. I knew it with absolute certainty. This thing was going to kill me, probably eat me, and no one would ever know what happened. They'd find my campsite eventually, my equipment, but my body would never be recovered. Then I heard the howl. It came from the opposite side of the clearing, a sound that started low and rose to a crescendo that echoed through the forest. It wasn't a wolf's howl, it was too deep, too powerful, carrying a primal rage that made even the creature advancing on me pause and turn. What emerged from the trees was the Dogman. I'd seen the drawings, the blurry photos that people claimed showed the creature. None of them did it justice. It stood at least 7 feet tall on digitigrade legs like a wolf's, but thicker, more powerful. Its body was covered in thick, dark fur, with a muscular build that suggested both incredible strength and speed. The head was unmistakably canine, with pointed ears, a long snout filled with sharp teeth, and eyes that glowed with an amber fire. But it walked upright like a man, with long arms that ended in clawed hands. It was a perfect fusion of human and wolf, something that should have been impossible, but was standing right there in front of me. The Wendigo, because I knew now that's what the first creature was, made a sound I can only describe as a screech. It was high-pitched and grating, like metal scraping against metal, and it made my teeth hurt. Then it charged at the Dogman with shocking speed. What followed was the most brutal fight I've ever witnessed. The Wendigo was fast, its elongated limbs striking like whips, those terrible claws raking across the Dogman's fur. But the Dogman was stronger, each of its blows landing with devastating force. They crashed together in the center of the clearing, a whirlwind of fur and claws and those horrible screeching sounds the Wendigo made. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to look away. The Dogman caught the Wendigo by one of its spindly arms and twisted, the crack of breaking bone echoing through the clearing. The Wendigo screamed, not in Emily's voice now, but in something that might have been its own voice, a sound of pure rage and pain. It wrenched itself free, leaving its arm behind in the Dogman's grasp, and the limb dissolved into a black, oily smoke. The Wendigo's body began to do the same, becoming less solid, more shadow. It was trying to escape. The Dogman wouldn't let it. It lunged forward with a speed that seemed impossible for something so large, its jaws closing on the Wendigo's throat. The amber eyes blazed brighter as it shook its head violently, like a wolf killing prey. The Wendigo's screeches became gurgles, then silence. Its body collapsed into that black smoke, which dissipated on a wind I couldn't feel, leaving nothing behind. The Dogman stood there, breathing heavily, its fur matted with something dark that steamed in the cold air. Then, slowly, it turned to look at me. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to flee. But I was exhausted, terrified, and somewhere in my shocked mind, I realized that this creature had just saved my life. If it wanted me dead, I would be dead. We stared at each other across the clearing, man and monster, for what felt like an eternity. Its eyes weren't animal eyes. There was intelligence there. Awareness, something almost human. It studied me with what seemed like curiosity, its head tilted slightly to one side. Then it did something I didn't expect. It pointed with one clawed hand, indicating a direction through the trees. When I didn't move, it pointed again, more emphatically, and made a low rumbling sound that might have been encouragement. It was showing me the way back to my camp. I started walking in the direction it had indicated, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stay upright. When I glanced back, the Dogman was still there, watching me. It hadn't moved from its position in the clearing. As I reached the tree line, it gave me one final look, then turned and loped off into the forest, disappearing into the shadows like it had never existed. I walked for what must have been 2 hours before I stumbled back into my campsite. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it that morning, my tent still standing, my camp stove sitting on its rock, my folding chair positioned to face the small fire ring. It all seemed so normal, so mundane, that I almost convinced myself I'd imagined everything. But my clothes were torn, my face was scratched from branches, and when I checked my camera, I found I'd accidentally triggered it during my flight through the forest. Most of the photos were blurry, useless, just streaks of green and brown. But there was a single image that must have been taken when I stumbled into the clearing. It showed the Wendigo, captured in perfect clarity for just a fraction of a second. That impossible body, those wrong features, that terrible smile. And in the background, just emerging from the trees, a massive shape covered in dark fur. I stared at that photo for a long time. Proof, undeniable proof that what I'd experienced was real. But who would believe it? More importantly, who would I want to believe it? The image was terrifying, nightmare fuel, the kind of thing that would haunt whoever saw it. I deleted it. Some might call that cowardice. Maybe it was. But I didn't want to be the guy who claimed to have photos of monsters. I didn't want the attention, the skeptics, the believers, the whole circus that would follow. And on a deeper level, I felt like sharing that image would be a betrayal of something sacred, a violation of a moment that was meant to be private. I packed up my camp that night, working by flashlight, throwing everything into my truck with shaking hands. I couldn't stay there, not after what I'd seen. The assignment didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except getting somewhere with other people, with lights and noise and normalcy. I drove through the night, not stopping until I reached a hotel in Marquette. I checked in, locked every lock on the door, and sat on the bed, trying to process what had happened. The Dogman was harder to pin down. The stories were more recent, mostly from the 20th century, though there were older accounts if you knew where to look. Sightings clustered in Michigan, particularly the Upper Peninsula. Witnesses described exactly what I'd seen: a wolf-human hybrid, standing upright, incredibly powerful. But unlike the Wendigo, the Dogman wasn't portrayed as inherently evil. The accounts were mixed. Some described attacks, but others told of encounters where the creature had simply watched humans, then disappeared. There were even a handful of stories, dismissed as fantasy by most researchers, of the Dogman protecting people from other dangers in the forest. I found one account buried in an obscure blog about cryptids that made me stop cold. It was from the 1950s, a second-hand story told by an old Native American man before he died. He spoke of the Dogman as a guardian, a protector of the forests. He said his people had known about them for generations, long before white settlers arrived. They weren't monsters at all, he claimed, but something else entirely, spirits of the forest who took that form to defend their territory from things that were genuinely evil. Things like the Wendigo. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if anything I read online can be trusted, but I know what I saw. I know that the Dogman saved my life when it had no reason to. It could have let the Wendigo kill me, or killed me itself afterward. Instead, it showed me the way home. 3 months have passed since that day. I finished the assignment remotely, using photos I'd taken earlier in the week. The magazine was happy with them, never knowing how close they came to not getting any photos at all. I've taken other assignments since then, but I find myself avoiding deep forest locations. I stick to areas closer to civilization now, places where the worst thing I might encounter is a bear or a moose. But sometimes, late at night, I think about going back. Part of me wants to return to the Blackwood Forest, to that clearing with the carved rock. I want to understand what happened there. I want to know if the Dogman is still there, still guarding those woods against things that shouldn't exist. I've started keeping a journal, writing down everything I remember about that day with as much detail as I can manage. Not for publication. I'll never publish this. But because I need to have it recorded somewhere, need to make it real and concrete, even if only for myself. The memory of the Wendigo's face, wearing Emily's voice like an ill-fitting mask, has started to fade around the edges. That terrifies me more than the creature itself did. If I forget, if I dismiss it all as a hallucination or a dream, then I'm vulnerable. I'm the kind of fool who wouldn't listen to warnings, who would follow a familiar voice into the darkness. I called Emily a few days after I got back. We don't talk often. Our lives have taken different paths, and we've never been as close as some siblings are. But I needed to hear her real voice, needed to confirm the difference between her and the thing that had worn her voice like a costume. Marcus? She'd said when she picked up, surprise evident in her tone. Is everything okay? You never call. And she was right, her voice was completely different. The warmth was real, not performed. The slight Chicago accent she'd picked up over the years, the way she pronounced my name, with a hint of the old family nickname she'd used when we were kids. The Wendigo had gotten the surface details right, but it couldn't replicate the depth, the history, the genuine connection. I'm fine, I'd told her. Just wanted to check in. See how you and the kids are doing. We'd talked for almost an hour about nothing particularly important. Her kids' school activities, her job, my photography. Normal sibling conversation. But I savored every minute of it, every genuine human connection that the thing in the forest could never truly replicate. I've also been researching disappearances in the Blackwood Forest area. It's grimly fascinating work. Going back decades, people have vanished in those woods. Hikers, hunters, even some locals who knew the area well. The official explanations very lost and succumbed to exposure, fell and couldn't get help, animal attacks. But reading between the lines, looking at the details, patterns emerge. Many of them were last seen responding to calls for help. Family members they'd been separated from, friends who they thought were in trouble. They'd tell their companions, I heard something or someone's calling for help, and then walk off into the trees, never to be seen again. Search parties found nothing. No bodies, no significant evidence. Just gone. How many of them had encountered the Wendigo? How many had followed a familiar voice to their deaths? And more disturbingly, how many similar creatures might be out there in other forests, other remote places where people disappear without explanation? I reported none of this to the authorities, of course. What would I say? That a monster mimicking human voices is responsible for multiple disappearances over the years. But it's okay, because another monster killed it? They'd think I was insane or making a tasteless joke. The families of the missing don't need someone like me showing up with wild stories. They need closure, and I can't give them that. But I did make an anonymous tip to the state police, suggesting they increase patrols around the Blackwood Forest and put up warning signs about the danger of following unfamiliar sounds in the woods. I doubt it will do much good, but it's something. What haunts me most isn't the horror of what I experienced. It's not the Wendigo's terrible face or the sounds it made. It's not even the violence of that fight in the clearing, though I still have nightmares about it. What haunts me is the question, how close did I come to following that voice? I'd taken that first step. If the old woman at the general store hadn't warned me, if I hadn't had that moment of clarity when I checked my phone, I would have walked deeper into the forest. I would have followed Emily's voice, convinced myself that somehow she was really there, really in trouble. And the Wendigo would have killed me, probably in some horrible, prolonged way, while using the voices of everyone I loved to torment me in my final moments. I survived by the thinnest of margins. By chance, by luck, by the superstitious warnings of a stranger. That's a humbling realization. And then there's the Dogman. I've spent weeks trying to understand why it helped me. The logical part of my brain wants to dismiss the idea that it was intentionally protecting me. Maybe it was territorial, and the Wendigo was an intruder. Maybe they're natural enemies, and I just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, incidental to their conflict. But I can't shake the memory of those amber eyes, the intelligence I saw there, the way it deliberately showed me the way back to camp after the fight was over. That wasn't animal behavior. That was conscious choice. I've become something of an amateur cryptozoologist, though I'll never admit that to anyone. I've joined online forums under a fake name, reading accounts from other people who claim to have encountered these creatures. Most are obviously fake or exaggerated, but a few have that ring of truth, that same quality of traumatized sincerity that I recognize in myself. There's a woman in Minnesota who swears she encountered a Wendigo in the Boundary Waters. She was ice fishing alone when she heard her husband's voice calling from across the frozen lake. She started walking toward it before her dog, a husky mix, went absolutely berserk, barking and pulling her back toward her ice shanty. She trusted the dog's instincts and retreated. Later that night, she heard something circling her shelter, crying out in her husband's voice, begging her to let him in. She stayed inside until morning. When she finally emerged, she found tracks in the snow around her shanty, but they weren't human tracks, and they weren't animal tracks either. There's a man in Ontario who describes an encounter with something that sounds like the Dogman, though he calls it by a different name, something from indigenous lore that I can't pronounce. He was hunting, got separated from his group during a heavy snowstorm, and was about to bed down for the night when he heard wolves closing in. He was sure he was done for. He had no shelter, was low on ammunition, and the pack sounded large. Then something big scared the wolves off. He saw it only briefly through the snow, massive fur-covered, standing like a man, but built like a predator. It looked at him for a long moment, then disappeared. The wolves never came back. He made it to safety the next morning. I don't comment on these posts, don't share my own story, but I read them, and I believe them. Or at least I believe that these people believe they experienced something genuine. We're a scattered community of people who've seen things we can't explain, can't prove, and can't forget. I've also been thinking about what it means that these creatures exist. If the Wendigo is real, what else is? What other monsters hide in the shadows, just outside our perception? And what does it say about our understanding of the world that these things can exist in the 21st century, in the age of satellites and smartphones, without mainstream science acknowledging them? Maybe it's because we've stopped looking. We're so convinced that we've mapped and cataloged everything, that every mystery has been solved, that we don't see what's right in front of us. We dismiss accounts like mine as hallucinations or hoaxes because the alternative, that our rational, ordered worldview is incomplete, is too uncomfortable to accept. Or maybe these creatures are smart enough to avoid detection. The Wendigo could mimic voices perfectly. Who's to say it couldn't learn to avoid cameras, to recognize the signs of human technology? And the Dogman had shown clear intelligence, awareness of its environment, and the people in it. Perhaps they've learned to exist in the spaces between our knowing, in the remote places we've decided aren't worth watching closely. I've changed since that day in the forest. I'm more cautious now, more aware of my surroundings. I listen differently when I'm in the wilderness, trying to distinguish between natural sounds and something else. I trust my instincts more and my rational mind less. When something feels wrong, I don't dismiss it anymore. But I've also become more appreciative of the mystery. There's something almost comforting in knowing that the world still holds secrets, that not everything has been cataloged and explained. We live in an age where you can look up almost any fact instantly, where satellite imagery means there are no truly undiscovered places left on Earth. But the Blackwood Forest proved that there are still unknowns, still places where ancient things live by ancient rules. Sometimes, I wonder about the old woman at the general store in Ravens Creek. Did she know about the Wendigo specifically? Or just that something dangerous lived in those woods? Had she encountered it herself? Or did she just pass along warnings that had been handed down through generations? I've thought about going back to ask her, but I'm not sure I want the answers. Some knowledge is better left unexamined. I've also wondered about the carved rock in the clearing. Those symbols I saw, what did they mean? Were they a warning? A ward? Some kind of territorial marker? The clearing felt significant, like a place where two worlds touched. Maybe it was a thin spot, a location where the barrier between our reality and something else wore thin. That would explain why both creatures were there, why their paths crossed in that specific location. The scientist in me wants to investigate, to document, to understand. But the part of me that stared into the Wendigo's eyes knows that some things are better left alone. There's a reason those forests have a reputation. There's a reason the old stories persist. We're meant to stay out of certain places, especially after dark, especially when we hear voices calling our names. I keep my deleted photo in a folder on an encrypted drive, along with my journal entries about that day. I tell myself it's for my own reference, but truthfully, I'm not sure why I keep it. Insurance, maybe. Evidence if anyone ever needs it. Or maybe just proof for myself that I'm not crazy, that what I experienced was real. The anniversary of the encounter is coming up soon. Part of me wants to mark it somehow, to acknowledge the significance of the day I learned that monsters are real. But how do you celebrate something like that? How do you commemorate the day you almost died? The day you saw creatures that shouldn't exist? The day a monster saved you from another monster? I think instead, I'll just call Emily again. Have another normal conversation about normal things. Hear her real voice, with all its genuine warmth and human imperfection. Remind myself of the difference between real connection and the hollow mockery the Wendigo offered. And I'll remember the Dogman, standing in that clearing, amber eyes glowing in the fading light. I don't know if I'll ever see it again. I don't know if I want to, but I'm grateful it was there when I needed it. I'm grateful that in a world where things like the Wendigo exist, there are also things like the Dogman creatures that might be monsters in appearance, but act with something approaching honor or compassion. That's what I hold on to now. Yes, there are terrible things in the darkness, things that want to hurt us, to consume us. But there are also protectors, guardians who stand between us and those terrible things. We just have to be wise enough not to wander into the darkness in the first place, smart enough to recognize when something is trying to lure us away from safety. My photography has changed since the Blackwood Forest. I still capture beautiful landscapes and wildlife, but I'm more aware now of what I'm not seeing. Every dark space between trees might hide something. Every sound in the forest might not be what it seems. But instead of making me paranoid, this awareness has made me more present, more attentive to the moment. I've also started including more shadows in my compositions, more mysteries. Before, I would have edited them out, clarified every element of the image. Now, I let the darkness be dark, let the unknown remain unknown. It feels more honest somehow, more true to the real nature of the wilderness. Some of my colleagues have commented on the change in my work. They say it's more evocative, more atmospheric. One reviewer described my recent photos as having a sense of lurking mystery, as if something just beyond the frame is watching the viewer. If only they knew how literal that description is. I haven't gone back to Michigan. I've turned down 3 assignments that would have taken me to the Upper Peninsula. Maybe I'm a coward for avoiding it, but I prefer to think of it as being prudent. I escaped once through a combination of luck and intervention. I don't want to test those odds again, but I dream about it sometimes. Not nightmares, exactly, though those come too. Sometimes I dream I'm back in the clearing, but this time I'm not running. I'm standing there watching the Dogman, and we're just looking at each other, trying to understand across the gulf that separates our kinds. In the dream, I always want to say thank you, but I can never find the words. Maybe there are no words adequate for thanking something for your life. Other times I dream that I didn't check my phone, that I did follow the Wendigo's voice deeper into the forest. Those dreams are worse because they feel so real. I can feel the cold air, smell the pine trees, hear Emily's voice getting closer and closer. And just when I'm about to see what's waiting for me, I wake up, heart pounding, sheets soaked with sweat. My friends worry about me. They say I've become more withdrawn, more isolated. They're not wrong. How do you connect with people who live in a world where monsters aren't real? How do you have normal conversations when you know things that would sound insane if you spoke them aloud? I've become very good at nodding and smiling, at keeping my true thoughts hidden behind a mask of normalcy. Maybe that makes me not so different from the Wendigo in the end wearing a human face, pretending to be something I'm not anymore. The difference is that I'm trying to protect people by keeping quiet, not trying to devour them. I've thought about seeking therapy, talking to someone about what I experienced, but what would I say? If I tell the truth, I risk being medicated or institutionalized. If I lie and say it was just a bear or a hallucination, then I'm the one denying reality, and that seems worse somehow. So I keep it to myself, lock it away in that encrypted folder with the deleted photo. The magazine wants me to do a follow-up assignment in the same area next fall. They love the photos so much they want to make it an annual feature, tracking how the landscape changes year by year. I haven't given them an answer yet. Part of me is curious morbidly, dangerously curious. Is the Wendigo really dead? Are there others? Is the Dogman still there, still protecting those woods? But a wiser part of me knows I should decline, should pick any other reason to say no and stick with it. I survived once. That should be enough. That has to be enough. Still, as I sit here writing this, looking out my apartment window at the city lights, I feel the pull of those dark forests. There's something addictive about having seen behind the curtain, about knowing that magic and monsters are real. Normal life feels flat in comparison, like I'm watching a play when I know the real world is much stranger and more terrifying than anything on stage. Maybe that's why people who have these encounters become obsessed with them. It's not just trauma or a need to be believed. It's that once you've seen the extraordinary, the ordinary becomes almost unbearable in its mundanity. You want to go back, to recapture that feeling of being fully, desperately alive, even if it means risking everything. But I won't go back. I can't, because unlike the people in horror movies who make stupid decisions, I know how lucky I was. I know that next time, the Dogman might not be there. Next time, I might not have that moment of clarity that saves me. Next time, I might follow the voice that sounds like someone I love, and I might not come back. So I stay in the cities, in the well-lit places where the only monsters are human. I take my photos of landscapes that are beautiful but safe. I live my life as if that day never happened. And if sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I heard someone calling my name, I remind myself that it's just my imagination, just a dream, just the wind. but I always check to make sure my doors and windows are locked, just in case. Because now I know monsters are real, and they can sound exactly like the people you love most in the world. And sometimes, just sometimes, other monsters will save you from them. That's the truth I carry with me every day. It's a weight I'll bear for the rest of my life, a secret that separates me from everyone around me. But it's also a gift in its strange way. I'm alive because I was warned, because I listened, because something decided I was worth saving. I owe my life to a creature that shouldn't exist, that science says is impossible. And somehow, that's the most unbelievable part of all. So if you're reading this, and I don't know why you would be, since I don't plan on sharing it, take it as the warning I wish I'd taken more seriously. If you're ever in the deep woods, especially at dusk or after dark, and you hear a voice you recognize calling out to you, a voice that shouldn't be there, don't answer, don't follow. And whatever you do, don't go looking for explanations. Sometimes the price of knowledge is too high. Sometimes survival is all the answer you need.